evening and welcome to Thai PBS World tonight. The COVID-19 pandemic in China seems probably under control, but it's not over yet. And as we have been told, second wave of coronavirus pandemic is coming all over the world and perhaps including China. So what's the direction of China in the near future? In the Thai PBS World tonight, our online program, Kun Thep Chayong and me talk to Dr. Am Tang Niran from Faculty of Laws, China Study Center, Chulalongkorn University.
We have to say that in the past 5 years, China faces a lot of challenges. First, we say that it cannot rely upon its cheap labor anymore. The labor cost in China is rising. Also, we say that throughout the trade war in the past 2 years, the global market has been closed off from China, and so it cannot rely on its trading sector. And then, in the past, China relied upon its investment in basic infrastructure, but then with its rising debt, we say that it cannot rely anymore on investing in infrastructure. So it faces a lot of challenges, and then come the COVID-19, which add upon all these challenges. So I think that China needs to change its strategy from its past strategy that relying on growth stimulated by investment and export into domestic consumption and technological development.
So how do you think that countries like Thailand and ASEAN should respond to what China is planning to do? As you mentioned, that it will focus more on the digitalization and the so-called intelligentization. So Thailand, of course, certainly will don't want to miss the boat. But how can a country like Thailand make the best use out of this situation?
A very good question, Kun Thep Chai. And I must say that, in Chinese, the term, the character crisis, right, Wei Ji, it composes of the first character, which is the crisis, the danger, and then the second character, which is the opportunity. So I think that, in dealing with crisis, we also have to strategize. And I mentioned earlier that China, when they're thinking about COVID-19, they have one dimension, which is to stabilize the economy, to deal with short-term effect. But they also have the long-term strategy in building basic foundation and infrastructure for the development of new technologies. And they even use the incident, the COVID-19, as a pressure to transform most sectors of the economy. And I think that, many societies in ASEAN countries, even in Thailand, we see this trend, right, that the COVID-19 actually transform how we work, how we shop, how we communicate with others. But I think that the key here is that how do we strategize and make it sustainable in the long term. I think an example is that during the SARS crisis back in 2003, China uses this as an opportunity, right, to promote e-commerce. And I think that the e-commerce giants Alibaba, JD.com, they all have history of big massive growth from the SARS period. So I think that right now, we all turn to online and to all these new technologies. But I think that the key here is also not just to do it just during the short term or just do it through other people's platform, but how can we strategize, build our own platforms, build our own infrastructure during this crisis in order to build the long-term foundation for the use of all these technologies.
Dr. Am, you live in China for a while and you also study in the US. Perhaps you can see how these two countries coming out of COVID-19. How do you think the position of China and the US in the world will be changed after COVID-19?
Well, I think it's a very interesting phenomenon that's happening right now because it's really unprecedented. I mean that in the past couple of months, at first, we often compare COVID-19 to the SARS epidemic in 2003. But then right now we know that it's a lot different, right? It's not only the China's problem, but it's already a global pandemic across the world. And I think that this poses great challenges to the world economy in the short term. First, to the Chinese economy, I think that the external shock will be huge. So even right now, when they start to recover from their pain of closing down businesses during the past 2 months, but still, the export sector, the global market is still not very optimistic. And then, we see all the global depression happening right now because of the economic situation all over the world. And especially in the US, Kunatha, you mentioned that the situation there is quite grim. If you look at the numbers in New York City right now or in the Washington state, we say that it's still really very serious. And I think that if we look at the example of China, right, at least you need 2 months in order to contain the situation and then start recovering. So I think it still takes a couple of months for the US and also Europe to recover from the situation. Now, in terms of the geopolitical effect from this global crisis, I think that we still have to wait and see. First, how will the US manage and recover from this crisis? And then I think this will also determine the answers to the geopolitical puzzle of whether we will see the shift in the geopolitical landscape coming up in the next few years. But I think at least one thing is quite sure is that we are seeing perhaps the end of American global dominance. Perhaps not the end of the US as the world superpowers. The US will be one of the world superpowers, but we see other superpowers sharing the US stage, including China, including Europe, including Russia and many other countries. And I think we see clearly from this pandemic that we don't see much of the US leadership, US global leadership in fighting the pandemic. And I think US is still struggling with its own domestic problem right now too.
Yeah. The pandemic is certainly adding another negative turn to the Chinese-American relationship, right? And as we all know, the US, President Trump, to be more specific, is trying to hold China accountable for the outbreak of the virus. And this certainly has added a new dimension to their rivalry. So, Dr. Am, how do you think this will play out in their relationship long term?
Kunthep, we see that nationalism plays a big role in both countries. So we see that President Trump, he mentioned that it's China's virus. He stopped doing that right now. But actually, even from the Chinese side, the official in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in China also actually posted a Twitter saying that there's a possibility that the virus came from the US. So both sides play this nationalistic card, and I think that China also emphasized to its public its success in containing the virus, and the US failure in containing the virus right now, while President Trump, also play upon this nationalistic sentiment. So I think that in the middle term, Kunthep, we will see the rise of nationalism and nationalistic sentiments in both countries, and especially in the US. The context is that the national election is coming at the end of the year. One of the Trump's strong point is his use of all these nationalistic sentiments to build upon his base. And I think that for President Xi Jinping also, to tackle domestic challenges, he also needs to play up the nationalistic card. So I think that what we see, at least in the middle term, is the rise of nationalism